Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. Tonight we begin our reading of Aunt Jenny and the Delayed Quest. You know how in adventure stories the lead character is very often a young person just starting out on their lives with no real clue about how things work and all like that? Not always. Prologue. Story hour was nearly over when Jennifer Winston, Aunt Jenny, reached the last page of Little Jenny and the Moon Maid. And so, having slain the last of the night gaunts, the silver huntress turned to the Ruffly Man and little Jenny and said, "Now, my friends, you are free to continue your journey and set foot on the hidden road." The Ruffly Man saluted the huntress with his sword and bowed deeply. "We are indeed indebted to you, my lady, more than words can ever express." "Oh, certainly we are," said little Jenny. She smoothed the skirts of her sailor dress and curtsied. "Thank you, ma'am." "It was my pleasure and my duty, all part of taking back the night and making twilight safe. Fare you well." With that, the huntress slung her bow, stepped into a patch of moonlight, and followed the moonbeam up into the sky as if quickly mounting a stair. When she was gone from sight, the Ruffly Man took out a lacy handkerchief and wiped his sword clean before returning it to its scabbard. He turned and offered a hand to little Jenny. "Shall we be on our way? My lady love awaits." "Oh, let's," the girl replied, taking the proffered hand. "I'm sure that wherever this road leads, we shall find her at its end." They turned and together set foot upon the silvery cobblestones that the moonlight had revealed, and set forth into the unknown. After they had taken no more than a dozen steps, the clearing was empty and silent, except for the eerie call of the zibzoo bird. The end. "Miss Jenny! Miss Winston! Aunt Jenny!" the young girls clamored. "Please, ma'am, can we start the next?" "Oh, yes, please, another story? More!" "Well, there's not enough time to start a new book, but at least we can pick out one we like for next time. What would you like? We haven't done an Oz book in a while." "No, no," little Annie Saunders insisted. "The next Little Jenny." "Yes, yes," Megan Chen chimed in. "You read Little Jenny the best." The other little girls all joined in, and so she agreed that next time she would start reading Little Jenny on the Hidden Road. With that decided, the youngsters streamed out of the room and the library and onto the campus of the Winston Academy for Girls. "Quietly, girls," Indira Patel, the head librarian, cautioned to the departing students. She turned back, shook her head, and smiled at Jenny. "I'm glad that you decided to continue Aunt Jenny's story hour now that you've retired." "How could I do anything else? They're willing to sit and listen and read along with me without a screen anywhere in sight. Our girls have always been readers and lovers of books. Story hour and Friday book club and all my girls dropping by to visit me at the cottage, those are the highlights of my life." "And so I heard it will be another Little Jenny book that you will be reading?" "Yes, I think the fact that the real Little Jenny, my great-aunt, grew up on the estate, and both she and the author, Cassandra Montclair, went to this very school, makes it, well, a little more real to them." "And you read her stories with a little extra feeling, I think." "True enough. She's one of us even for me, more than for the girls. Heavens, I grew up with great-aunt Jenny herself reading me the Little Jenny books. I can still hear her voice at times when I'm reading the stories aloud to the kids." Jenny picked up her embroidered bag and slung it over her shoulder. A tiny cry of mew came from within, where the kitten, Little Dickens, had been sleeping. Hearing it, Big Tom crawled out from under the chair where he'd been napping and stretched. With a couple of licks, he had his long fur properly in place. He then padded over to stand by the door, waiting for Jenny. "Well, I really must be going. I need to retrieve Rudy." "Enjoy your walk," said Miss Patel. As Aunt Jenny and her cats left the reading room, the librarian chuckled and shook her head. Aunt Jenny and Big Tom had been an institution here before Indira Patel had come to the academy to take over the library, and after all, the Winston family had founded the school. Well, at least the dog stayed outside. When Aunt Jenny arrived on the green in front of the library, Rudy, a Brittany spaniel, came running toward her following a soccer ball. Jenny trapped the ball, dribbled it a few feet, and passed it to one of the girls. "Thank you for watching Rudy," she called. "No problem, Aunt Jenny," said Jessie Barvatian, kicking the ball to a younger girl that Aunt Jenny didn't immediately recognize. She must be new this term. "Come, Rudy, come," Jenny called and headed in the direction of the estate. The Winston Academy had been founded by Jenny's multi-great-grandfather, the first J.P. Winston, on land that abutted the Winston estate, and both were still owned by the Winston Family Trust. For all that the estate and school had been home to her for almost her entire life, she still felt a little out of place. No longer working at the school, she dressed more casually now, loose-fitting brown corduroy slacks and a green foliage print blouse, walking shoes, her silver-shot brown hair in a loose bun. With no classes to teach, no library duties beyond story hour, her time was her own. After almost a year, she still wasn't used to it. Jenny let herself out the west gate and climbed the hill up to the woods, past the farm, enjoying the quiet and the chance to stretch her long legs. Chapter 1. The Beginning. Retirement left Aunt Jenny feeling like something was missing. Oh, she had plenty of time for gardening, and the gardens had never looked so good at Wingate, which was how she still thought of her cottage, not as home, even though she'd dwelt there for more than a quarter of a century. And, of course, she had her little ones, the cats, Little Dickens and Big Tom, and Rudy the dog, and many of her girls, the students and young teachers of the Winston Academy, came by regularly. And, too, there was no denying that she was healthier than she'd been in years, thanks to walking 5 or more miles a day in the woods and byways of the campus and estate. Still, she hadn't had this much time to herself since Dr. Tom, her late husband, died 20 years before. Working the library and acting as assistant coach at the school had always kept her busy. Even before that, caring for Tom as his body slowly gave out on him, she had been alone with him and not alone. Now, on her own, she had time to read, and when her eyes tired, she could listen to more books on her long walks or while she puttered in the garden, could read so many more books. It was the 1st of May, and the woods and the grounds were abuzz with life. It was a glorious day for walking, cool, crisp, and full of promise. Big Tom and Rudy were marching along on either side of her, and Little Dickens was nestled in the large cloth bag slung over her shoulder amidst her knitting. Her commonplace book, pruning shears, and heaven only knows what else she'd accumulated. She'd been walking for an hour, and while time might have slowed her a little, her long legs propelled her at a pace that many half her age would envy. She was resting at the fork just above Windy Hill, the little farm that allowed the estate to qualify as agricultural land. She contemplated whether to continue up to High Winds. The big house was now inhabited by the headmistress of the academy, since there was no one from the family other than Jenny still living in New England, and Wingate Cottage was sufficient to her needs. Perhaps instead of High Winds, she should swing back down to the school and take one of the horses out for a ride. The equestrian team wasn't big enough this year to need all of them at once. Aunt Jenny didn't like to dwell on the privileges that the Winston Family Trust brought with it. She'd worked hard at the academy and was satisfied living in just the cottage, the smallest dwelling on the estate, but access to the professionally maintained stables of the trust-endowed school was a luxury she was all too happy to indulge in. That and just walking the woods and grounds of the estate and campus on such a beautiful day. A doorbell rang, shaking her out of her reverie, and it took a moment to realize that it was coming from the phone in her bag. She and Dickens just stared at it for a while, and then she recalled the app that clever Sandra Smith had installed for her, the one that let her look out of the camera in the doorbell back at Wingate. She wrestled Dickens for possession of the phone and tapped the screen. The face of Pat, the letter carrier, stared back at her. "Hi, Pat. Happy May Day. I have a package for you, Aunt Jenny. It needs a signature. Oh, I'm not at home. I'm up the hill above the farm. That's my next stop. Want to meet me there? All right, see you in a few minutes." Aunt Jenny's long-legged stride brought her to the farmyard quickly, just as Pat was walking back to the postal van from delivering the mail. The package turned out to be about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, and addressed to her in, of all things, her late Aunt Mary's antique hand. Jenny signed for the package and carried it back down to Wingate, filled with curiosity. Mary had passed away nearly 2 months before. They'd never gotten along very well, and Jenny had no idea what the box would contain or why it was arriving now. The little ones picked up on her puzzlement and shared it. Tom and Rudy each nearly tripped her several times as they danced around her ankles. Dickens wrestled a ball of yarn in her bag. When she arrived at the cottage, she found one of the girls from the school, Sasha, Alexandra Levin, a tall, lanky, athletic, auburn-haired senior, lounging in one of the outdoor chairs in the front yard under the shade of a large pine. "Hello, Sasha. You're looking awfully relaxed with AP test week coming." The girl smiled and shrugged. "Midterm grades came out today. I nailed all my AP classes. I know the material. I've been rereading texts. The main thing I'll need next week are focus and a good night's sleep. I want the credit, and I'm pretty sure I can get 5s or 4s. I'll be ready." "Great, kid. Don't get cocky." "Don't worry, Aunt Jenny. I'm confident, not complacent." "Good. What brings you around?" "Couple of things. I'm not worried about the AP tests, but I was thinking that maybe I could use a few pointers on getting along at Northeastern. You went there, right?" "I did, back in the Stone Age. Things may have changed. Heavens, I know they have. But sure, I'd love to help. And the other thing?" "I finished that book you lent me, The Oracle Glass. You were right, it was very good." Sasha stood, smiled a bit shyly, and proffered the book. "I was hoping I could trade it in for another, for when I need a break from rereading all that AP stuff." "Bring it inside, my dear. I'll just be a moment. I'm dying to see what this could be," replied Aunt Jenny, holding up the package in her hand. Once inside Wingate, Sasha laid the book on the kitchen table while Aunt Jenny began to open her package. She untied the twine, then fetched a letter opener from the small sewing table in the hallway. She slipped it under the brown tape and neatly unwrapped the box, setting it on the table. Inside, she found a folded piece of paper and a distinctive antique jewelry box, one she hadn't seen in nearly half a century. It had belonged to her own great-aunt Jenny, that Jenny Winston, the one upon whom the title character of Little Jenny's Journeys had been based. Aunt Jenny set Great-Aunt Jenny's box on the table and opened the accompanying letter. "Jenny," it read, "I owe you a tremendous apology, one I was too ashamed to make in life. This box and what it contains should have been your inheritance all those years ago when my Aunt Jenny, your great-aunt, died." That would have been 45 years ago when Aunt Jenny was in college. The letter continued, "It seems so petty now, but I was always jealous of you, of how close you two Jennies were. That jealousy made me do a shameful thing. As executor, I should have passed this on to you, but you were away at school, and at first I told myself I'd just hold it until you returned on break, but then as time went by, somehow I decided to keep it for myself. Joseph's job took us out west, and I took the box with me. I almost gave it to you when you married your young doctor, but forgot, or so I told myself, and so it was left behind. When your Dr. Tom took sick, and you were so good and selfless caring for him, I could not bring myself to admit how petty I had been. The guilt only got worse with time, and so, coward that I am sending it to you in my will. The package has been kept by the lawyers since shortly after the towers fell, and they have instructions to find you if you are no longer at Wingate when I die. Aunt Mary, November 15th, 2001. More than another 2 decades, then, even after deciding to do the right thing. Jenny was enthralled. She opened the box and found inside another small folded piece of paper and a pendant, an amethyst set in silver, hanging on an elaborate silver chain. Setting the note aside, she hooked the necklace around her neck. It was warm to the touch. When she unfolded the small note, a grin stole across her face. It was in Great Aunt Jenny's hand, but even more than that, it was in Jenny script, the secret language that Great Aunt Jenny had shared only with her, just the sort of special bond that had made Aunt Mary jealous, no doubt. Her hand trembled a bit, a new missive in Jenny script after all these years. It was a treasure in and of itself. It only took a few moments for Aunt Jenny to dig through her memories to recall their special language. Little, or dear, perhaps, little one, lift the tray for more, or another, it read. Aunt Jenny stared at the box for a moment, then, smiling, she pressed on the sides of the box with her fingers while pulling up on the insides with her thumbs. What had seemed to be inner walls in the floor of the box came loose and lifted out. Beneath the tray were 3 thin sheets of vellum. Jenny set aside the box and unfolded the paper. More Jenny script. Little one, read these pages in full, then put on the necklace and stand before my mirror. Upon reading this last, Jenny reflexively looked at the full-length, walnut-framed mirror at the end of the hall. It had belonged to Great Aunt Jenny. When she did, her head swam and her vision clouded. She stood staring dumbly at the mirror, and the landscape reflected in it. For the life of her, it seemed that the cat, Big Tom, leapt right into the mirror, followed shortly by the dog. Jenny shook herself. "No!" she cried, and stepped after them, only to trip over the frame and through the mirror. Little Dickens complained from within her bag as they tumbled to the ground. "What the hell?" Sasha's voice, so close, startled her. "Language, dear," chided Aunt Jenny reflexively, even before raising herself to a sitting position. "That's no language for a young She paused, her head still spinning a bit. "Where did you come from?" she asked Sasha, who was standing in the clearing where the hallway should be. "I was watching from the kitchen. I wanted to ask about the other book, but you seemed so engrossed with your package. I just waited. The cat, the dog, they jumped into the mirror. And then you headed after them and tripped. I tried to catch you. We both fell through the mirror. Where are we? Where's the cottage?" "An excellent question, Sasha," Jenny replied, beginning to feel herself again. As she started to rise, Sasha offered her a hand and helped her to her feet. They looked around. They were standing in a clearing in a wood on the side of a hill. In the direction which she had fallen, there was a river. Its far bank was shrouded in fog. Turning around, there was mist and fog in several directions, generally downhill. There was no sign of the mirror, the bedroom, the cottage, or anywhere familiar. Jenny considered the lay of the land. It looked almost familiar. This could be Great Hockomock Hill, and that the river, pretty much like they would be around the cottage. "Except there's no cottage," protested Sasha. "No, and the trees are wrong. Wrong mix of species and in the wrong places." "But you're right, ma'am, the geology would be the same. But how did we get here? Did we actually step through the mirror? What is this, Alice in Wonderland?" "No," replied Jenny quite seriously. "It's probably a lot more like Little Jenny's Journey to Fairyland. Do you know the Little Jenny's Journeys?" "No, not really." "They were a series of books written more than 100 years ago. Just like Alice's adventures were written for Alice Little, Little Jenny was written for my Great Aunt Jenny. This," she fingered the necklace, "was hers. It was in the package I showed you. I was just reading about it when," she gestured at their surroundings, "when this happened." "So we're in Fairyland?" asked the bewildered girl. "I've no idea. It doesn't look all that magical, well, except for the fog and mist, I suppose, and we were in the Hockomock Hills." "I'm sorry?" Sasha looked even more confused. "The old Indian name for the hills the school and houses are built on, same as the swamp south of here and the town's name before J.P. Winston built the mills and the academy. They renamed the town after him." "Oh, I didn't know that. Well, about the old name for the town. It means where spirits dwell. Both the hills and the swamp were thought to be, I don't know, haunted or enchanted. mysterious by any account. After a moment, it dawned on her. Wait, Rudy and Tom, where are they? She looked around, panicky, and called out, Rudy, Tom, come, come! And after she'd repeated it a few times, they appeared. Rudy, the Brittany spaniel, slunk out of the woods looking guilty. Big Tom swaggered. Sasha, hold Rudy's collar, would you? Let's not have him running off. Then let me sit down and read Great Aunt Jenny's letter, Aunt Jenny requested, as she walked over and sat down on an outcropping of rock and caught her breath. She patted her lap, and Big Tom climbed into it. Little Dickens scolded and poked his head up out of Jenny's bag. Sasha and Rudy sat down at Jenny's feet, and she looked around and picked up the folded vellum sheets she must have dropped when she fell through the mirror. I may be a little slow in reading this, she explained. It's written in a private language that Great Aunt Jenny and I used. We called it Jenny script, and it's been more than 45 years since I last used it. I'm just a little rusty. Jenny dear, she read out loud, as you may have guessed, some of the little Jenny stories are true. At least there is a fairy place, and I did visit there as a girl. Granny May thought that perhaps I was the Lady Jennifer of... I don't know this word, she explained. The old stories only called her Jennifer or Genevieve. Maybe the word I stumbled over was story or legend? This is harder than I thought. Sasha was staring. Aunt Jenny refolded the papers and set them in her lap. This is all a bit much, isn't it? Yes, ma'am. Yes, Aunt Jenny. I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around the fact that we're outdoors, Wingate is gone, and that with all this mist and the sun behind a cloud, even the light here looks funny. Aunt Jenny nodded and looked around, really taking in the surroundings. She ended by studying the clouds overhead. A thoughtful look furrowed her brow, and she bit lightly on her cheek. Sasha, just out of curiosity, which cloud do you think the sun is behind? Why, it's a... No. You know, you can't really tell, can you? They're all about the same brightness. It must be up there somewhere. What else would the light be coming from? But I can't tell. Aunt Jenny sighed. You said that you don't know the Little Jenny stories, Sasha nodded. Well, in Little Jenny's Journey to Fairyland, the first book, she finds herself in what she learns is called the Halflands, a place between the 9 realms. Fairyland, Dreamland, the Earthly Paradise, the Great White, and the rest of it. A place where the sun acts strangely, where dawn and dusk are places, and in much of it the sun doesn't rise and set. The clouds glow, sometimes brightly, sometimes dimly. As another little girl might have said, Sasha, I don't think we're in Massachusetts anymore. Sasha pulled out her phone, and after fiddling with it, reported, No service, no phone, no internet, nothing. I've never seen that anywhere on campus or the estate. Nor I. Jenny wrestled her phone out from under Dickens and confirmed that she too had no reception. Though I don't suppose you have to go all the way to Fairyland to have no signal. They sat in silence after that for several minutes. Finally, Aunt Jenny shook herself and fished a ball of yarn out of her bag. Sasha, could you braid this into a leash for Rudy while I try to read Great Aunt Jenny's letter? After that, we'll take stock and decide what to do. Yes, Aunt Jenny. They sat there for some time after that, Aunt Jenny stroking Big Tom's fur while she read, Sasha braiding, and little Dickens rolling around in Jenny's large cloth shoulder bag, wrestling another ball of yarn. Rudy seemed unusually quiet, probably because he could tell that they were somewhere strange. Overhead, the clouds brightened slightly, but nothing else changed. Well, said Aunt Jenny as she folded the paper and put it away, I suppose the only choice is to see if we really are in another world. From what the papers say, we should be able to see a lot of the surrounding territory from a tower that stands at the top of the hill in the equivalent of where High Winds stands back home. Let's make our way up the hill to see if there's a tower or a house up there. Okay, sounds better than sitting around here wondering where the cottage went. With that, they turned in the direction that should be north and started to make their way uphill, unaware of the eyes that watched them from a nearby cluster of bushes. Once they were out of sight, a small figure crawled out from the bushes and followed them. And we will continue with Aunt Jenny next time.